Hello and welcome to the Thrive Now show. I am so excited to have a featured guest today, Dr. Lin Morel. Dr. Lin is a pioneer in connecting the dots between our spiritual nature and everyday life. She's a visionary, a thought leader, an author, a speaker, a facilitator who has inspired tens of thousands of people across the globe to step into the creative expression of their spiritual essence, purpose, and destiny. Her journey as a survivor of multiple traumas taught her that no matter what happens to us, we have a core of wisdom that will move us beyond our challenge into expansion, empowerment, and the ability to create lives better than we could ever imagine. With decades of experience, Dr. Lin supports her clients as they step into an accelerated, energetic, transformational healing at the deepest level. Dr. Lin, thank you. I think you're the only person on the planet that I have met that has gone through more trauma than me. And in the moment I met you, I would have never have known that. You clearly live your work. You clearly demonstrate what's possible. So I want to kick it off. The whole show is about rising and thriving. And so my first question to you is, what do you say to the listeners who are dealing with a traumatic experience right now, whether it be a natural disaster, whether it be an illness of themselves or a loved one, or, a violent attack of nature, whatever it may be? What would you say to them now?
You know what? I would tell them to take a deep breath. So I invite all of our listeners. It's free, it's cheap, it's better than psychotherapy. So let's receive the breath into us without pushing it. And naturally, let us release the breath. And just bring again, receive the breath without pushing. And after you've received the breath naturally, organically release the breath. And in receiving the breath, we're acknowledging the gift of life no matter where we are. In this moment, we have breath. We have the opportunity to move forward in the middle of all the stuff that could hit us. And in that breathing in and out, we establish the fact that, yes, we're alive, no matter what's going down, earthquakes, fires, floods. In this moment, as long as we have our breath, we have the ability to rise and thrive right now. And for those of us that are like super hyper and maybe hyperventilating, if you put your tongue on the roof of your mouth and receive the breath through your nose and let it go. That's an even deeper way to calm yourself down. And just notice if just 3 or 4 breaths brings you here and now. It's the most simple thing. We're given the gift of breath, no matter what trauma we go through, as long as we're alive. And our job, should we choose to accept this mission in a hermetically sealed jar at Funk and Wagnalls, that dates me to Johnny Carson, we can literally recreate our life in the middle of the tempest, the destruction, the loss of people that we love, airplane crashes, all sorts of things, fires, domestic violence, narcissism. I could go on and on and on with the things that could take us out. But what I want to say is, look, if I can survive, if Jennifer can survive, you can not only survive, you can thrive and flourish. And that's really why I have a countenance of peace most of the time, because I've done all that hard stuff. I've been in the rubble of my retreat center. I've watched my home burn down. My husband died in a plane crash. My other husband died of a hospital error, covered up, no less. So I've been angry. I've been grieving. I've been resentful. I've been vindictive. The whole gamut of human emotions. And I think if we all stopped right now and all our listeners just pick one thing that's just bugging the you-know-what out of you. And it's probably this big. But if we can receive the breath, we can shrink that sucker down to its appropriate size. It may not be easy, that's for sure, but we can walk out the other side of that constriction and have lives that are so extraordinary that I can't even begin to address what's possible in the middle of the rubble.
And I think that's it. So, when, I reflect back on, the days after, surviving a terrorist attack, being 15 feet from a bomb and not knowing what hit me, and trying to discern and make sense of all that. And I couldn't make sense of it. And, fast forward about 6 months into my healing journey, my meditation teacher, who I'd been working with for a number of years, I had a lot of respect for, sat me down and said to me, one day you're going to see this as the greatest gift of your life. And I remember being so angry at her. And I was like, are you serious? Do you even have any idea of what I've been through? And yet I know this woman doesn't have a mean bone in her body. And I know that she genuinely loves and cares about me and the people that she serves. Here's what she did. She planted a seed that day. And that seed took many, many months to germinate. But over time, what ended up happening was I started to go, if this were a gift, what are the gifts in it? And in the beginning, I didn't come up with anything. All I could think of is all the bad that happened. But it took some time, it took some patience to be with it. But eventually I got there. And what I then fast forward several years beyond that, I now can sit here before you today and say that experience was one of the most horrific experiences of my life and has turned out to be the greatest gift of my life. Because of what it taught me, what it, the lessons that I learned, and it put me on a path that I never in my wildest dreams could ever imagine. And I think that that's what it is I would like to talk about, is surrendering to what's happening. And even though you don't like it, even though it can be extraordinarily painful, extraordinarily heartbreaking, but when we still have the breath, there's something to rise up from.
That is so true.
And I think this is it. And I think this is the other piece, is that, we all have the ability to rise up from our experiences. And we all, I've come to understand that everybody on the planet has experienced some form of trauma. The key here is that to shift our perspective of trauma. I used to believe that my trauma was a result of me being a bad person, even though I wasn't. That these experiences were happening to me, i.e. a victim mentality. And I would never call myself a victim, but yet I was living in that mentality of victimhood. And it wasn't until my experience, after the bombings, that I started to realize, wait a minute, what if this were happening for me? What if this were happening for my own growth? What if this were happening for my own evolution? Did I like it? Absolutely not. I wouldn't wish it upon anyone. But it was my journey.
Mhm.
It was my journey. It was my path. And it taught me that I had something inside of me I didn't even know existed, that I had the power within to rise up from that. And I know you've had a boatload of trauma. I can't even begin to imagine what your life has been like. And yet you are such a peaceful warrior, this, you truly do live what you teach. And I think that's what's so inspiring. That's why I was so excited to speak to you today, because, I just would love for you to share some wisdom. What are some golden nuggets, to keep people on their path? Today's Veterans Day. And even though you and I did not serve, we have helped and, served veterans, that are dealing with trauma, to help them set themselves free and rise up from that. But what would you say to people that are struggling with post-traumatic stress, for example?
Oh, it's such a loaded question, Jennifer. And it's one that needs to be asked. I will start by saying that without going into the traumas, let's just say it started in the womb and it continued through my entire life with trauma, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, sexual, you name it, it's happened. My retreat center burned down, my home burned down, my mother died in a fire 6 weeks before mine. I could go on and on and on and on. A husband died in a plane crash and one died of overdose, my own health challenges. And I was a card-carrying victim at some level because it's not fair. I ran away at 17 to protect my life, worked my way through college, graduate school, on and on. But I was missing that something. And, sometimes we have a mountaintop experience, and I ran a retreat center after the first one burned down. I moved to another one, and that's when my husband died in the crash. And so I was here with this stark reality that I didn't feel well. I could barely get out of bed. I couldn't remember why I got up to get something. And I was living off of quarters because I couldn't work. My mind had stopped. I evidently had Lyme and Epstein-Barr and all that. But I made a decision, and it takes a decision, that I was going to get up one more time than I fell. And the thing that gave me that courage was when I was 15, my younger sister wanted to take judo lessons. And I'm chubby, I'm overweight, I'm teased, I'm bullied, and I became the chaperone. And that was a life-changing event because 3 months later she quit and my parents said, well, you don't have to go anymore. And it's like, no, I found a place where I was accepted. And within about 3 months, I was teaching grown men that were beginners how to do break falls. And that love affair with the martial arts is what gave me the stamina to literally get up. So I went from judo to taekwondo and Uichiru, Okinawan karate, to tai chi, to kung fu. I studied in China, but that foundation of you make progress and then it flattens out. So for all of us in trauma, you may be at ground zero, and it may seem like there is no tomorrow. But again, if you can take a breath and find something that makes you happy. For example, I don't know, maybe 30, 35, 38 years ago, I was working with someone who had survived Auschwitz, and we were having dinner with friends. And I said, and his wife says, so Irv, you going to work with her? He goes, nah, I'm miserable. I'll never be happy. I can't stand anything. And so his wife says to him, Irv, you're a liar. What about the jacuzzi? And he got this big grin on his face. So he found his one thing. And, in the rubble, I was so mad that my house burned down. A client stayed at my retreat center, and he decided to fix my what do you call it? My wood burning stove. And so he made it so hot that it ignited the beams because it was a 150-year-old house. So I woke up at 4:44 and heard go home. So I have a speech called your 444s. I got up, David and I drove home. When we got, this is going to sound strange, but when we got to the beginning of our street, my mother, who had perished 6 weeks earlier in a fire, I felt her presence in the back seat. I said, David, I feel my mother's presence. And he goes, well, what does she want to say? And she didn't say anything, but I looked up and there were these billowing black clouds. And I literally felt her presence. And in the middle of that darkness, and the two people escaped. The one guy who set the house on fire crawled in, rescued the other guy. And the only reason he lived was a serendipity. He was staying upstairs. My cats fell asleep, my kittens on the bed, and he didn't want to wake them up. That random act of kindness took him downstairs to one of the bedrooms. He was shaken awake. He felt it was an angel. In Vietnam, he passed out. He was until something shook him awake. And that same sensation got him out of bed, and he crawled to the next doorway where the man was suicidal. He'd been laid off after 30-something years with his bank. And together they got out of the house, which was so incredible. So when my house burned down, I was so shocked, actually, because first my mother, now my house, and my business and my husband's business, we were wiped out completely. I said, I got to do something. It was a leap year, and the water was freezing as it hit the driveway. It was in the 20s. So I said, I got to do something. I'm going to the Frieden Shooting restaurant, which was, a couple miles away. And I bought hot chocolate and coffee for everybody. I called my friend Sally Schultz. I said, Sally, my house is on fire. She goes, praise the Lord. He's cleaning you out for something new. Well, I didn't appreciate that. Then I called my Indian grandmother, Twyla, who I had met and gone to the reservation and done some work with them. And she goes, oh, the great mystery is cleaning you out for some new delight. And like I'm hearing from Christianity to somebody who has the Great Spirit within like 5 minutes. And I drove back. I gave all the guys their stuff, and it was clear that my house was not salvageable. And I said to the fire chief, please let it burn, because people were collapsing from smoke exhaustion, the firemen. He goes, see that man, lady? He's the fire inspector. If we don't do everything we can to put it out, we will get in trouble. So they did what they did. I had 3 walls standing left of my retreat center. And the man who had set it on fire, who actually was so traumatized himself, the Vietnam vet. And after I came back, I said, God, what do I do with this guy? And I literally had an urge to let him give me a hug. In which case he started crying and I started crying. And that was the beginning of him healing his trauma. And I made a flippant comment because the day before I'd visited Sally at her health food store. And she said, beware the man with white hair, there's fire all around him. And this was prophetic. Like she didn't know there was a guy there with white hair. I said, whatever it takes, Sally, he really needs some help. So in burning down my house, he had an epiphany. He spent the rest of his life being a missionary rather than a mercenary. It changed his life. I would gladly sacrifice my house. But at the time, my livelihood, my husband's livelihood, everything was gone except the clothes on our back and what I had taken to New Jersey. That's just one of many. But the thing that allowed me to move through that was I knew you can replace stuff. Nobody died. All my original artwork, I had swords from China. I studied in mainland China. I had a handmade sword that was $500 back in 1987, handmade by a master. That melted. The calligraphy's melted. My diploma's melted. My black belt melted. There was nothing left except that I'd been given a medicine bag from the native people. They blessed me with a pipe. And the fire burned up to that in the closet and left that bag untouched. And right next to it was the same bag, but it was consumed. So to me, I looked for something that was positive. So what I would say, no matter what's your trauma, if you've lost a child, my daughter was kidnapped. If you've lost your health, I've lost my health. If you can find one thing, just one thing, like Irv found his hot tub. All right, already, I got my hot tub, but it was a beginning. And this guy that accidentally burned my house down, his daughter was 9 months pregnant. He was a single dad and hadn't noticed. That's how blinded he was from his trauma. So they reunited, and so much good came out of my house burning. It was, I don't even have words for it, but was it hard? Yes. Because not only had my mother died, but David died about 6 months later in a plane crash. We had just bought a bomb, a shack, basically. And it was exquisite streams and original William Penn land grant on either side, but it was a hunting shack. Septic tank was a 55-gallon drum. In the spring, the stream ran through, and David finished the porch, and then he died. I was so annoyed. I was so pissed off at him. It's like, how could you do that to me? We were so happy. And yet, if we pay attention, I think he knew he was going to pass because he started taking long walks. And I think everybody that I've ever worked with who has passed away knows at some level that they're preparing. And when we have trauma, it's the end of a chapter in our life. Yeah. And we're left with the rubble and we don't know what to do. And we're overwhelmed. We can't think, but we can breathe. and we can find the things that survived. Certain things survived, what gave me hope. And when James died, my other husband, of a hospital overdose, I was angry. Oh my God, was I angry. They covered it up. They were liars. The hospital were liars. They lost the medical records. And I had to come to terms with anger. Oh my gosh, I could have killed somebody. Thank God I have punching bags. And it's like, and so I decided at some point I was going to be miserable and moan over losing my mother, my home. My first husband grabbed my daughter out of my arms not long after David died. And I didn't see her from the time she was 12 to 21. Now, why, you might say, didn't I go after him? I did. We went to court a million times. He would always fire his lawyer and get a new one and get an adjournment. And I was commuting back and forth from California. There was rage, and it's normal. It's not necessary. Well, I say maybe it's natural. We have those emotions, but my anger didn't do a darn thing except make me sicker.
Right.
So the breathing, the walking, the doing exercise. I had few friends. I got super sick after James died. And it's like, I didn't know how I was going to make it. I wanted to die. I just wanted to leave and join him, and it's like, yet I knew there was something for me to do. I didn't quite know what it was. And the blessing of that shifted in that my daughter came to visit me in California. We finally reconciled when her dad moved out of state. I could not even be near her without them renting a car and her laying down in the seat so he wouldn't notice her. That's how afraid she was of him, and still is. But the beauty is, when she came to visit with me, she turns around while she's making me dinner. She goes, Billy, that's her husband. Billy and I decided you don't eat enough. What kind of food do you like? I said, I love curry. She goes, oh, is there a farmer's market? We walked to the farmer's market. It was that day. She came back. She made me curry. Halfway through, while she's cutting the grass, whatever it's called,
Lemongrass.
lemongrass, she turns around and she goes, Mom, the king in the Bible and the two moms fighting over the baby? I said, yes, Solomon. She goes, Mom, you are like Solomon. Now, what she didn't know, that shortly after she was born, I was at a Bible study and they were doing the Old Testament. And the question was, if you could be anybody in the Old Testament, who would you be? Out of my mouth, not even thinking, was I'd be Solomon, because I wanted wisdom. Every trauma I have had has been a gem, like a diamond, because I have been forged, as you have, in the fires of life. We are compressed. We come out bruised and dirty and aching. And yet, if we look at each facet or each trauma, we really are diamonds in the rough. And that, her saying that, oh my God, it opened me up. You're right. Everything I've been through has been so that I could become a diamond. And diamond is my little logo. It's just because each facet, when we look at someone and hate our bomber or hate my husband because he took my daughter and kept her from me, but I needed to because I knew that he would hurt her. So I left to save her life and mine. But the diamond image, we're facets. Every one of us has multiple facets. Each time we deal with the trauma, each time we rise above and say, I'm not going to let that stop me. I'm going to use that as a stepping stone. Then we have compassion, because we are human, and human is to make mistakes and to screw up. And then the negativity, the gook around us tells us you're not good enough. Oh, you deserve this. You must have been a bad person in another lifetime, or you must have done this because you didn't treat your parents with respect, or you wished your mom would go away and she dies in a plane crash. All that stuff gets locked inside of us because we have a positive and a negative. And it's kind of like we have an angel on one shoulder and a little negative beastie on the other, and it's our choice. And the normal default is to go to the negative.
We're hardwired that way. I mean, we're conditioned. It's part of our cultures. It's part of, it's how we live, in society. And, and this actually is a great segue into what I want to delve into next. And thank you for sharing so openly and vulnerably. And because there was just so much wisdom in what you spoke about, and compassion is the doorway. The anger and the rage is normal. I remember growing up, anger was not an emotion that was widely accepted in my home, in the school, and eventually when I got older in the corporate world, it was just not allowed. And yet we were given it at birth. It's one of our core emotions. And I think it's, when we use it in a healthy way, meaning not hurting ourselves or another person, but allowing that emotion to fuel us into positivity, to actually do something better with our lives as a result of whatever horrific experience happened. And I love the analogy of a diamond, because what if we're all diamonds in the rough? And I've come to realize that, what if trauma is actually no different than the manure that we put on the seeds to make it grow? Does it smell good? No. Is it something you would want to experience and taste? No. But it's the very thing that, that fertilizes and accelerates growth and accelerates people's ability to flourish if we allow it. We can either submerge in it, or we could allow it to fuel us up. And I think that is one of the great abilities. But I want to delve into, how we can transcend from a world that is, I would say, still in survival mode. The fact that, 1% of the population around the globe is the wealthiest of the wealthiest, obviously dictates that on average, 99% of us are living in some form of survival mode, either barely surviving, which means, below the poverty line. You're surviving more like the middle class type of, you can be in different levels there. And then, surviving better. Like you might be on that upper echelon, but you haven't made it to the 1% club yet, right? What's it going to take for us as individuals and as humanity at large to transcend from that survival way of being and living into thriving? And when you answer that, I'd also like you to answer, what does thriving mean to you?
Good question. Well, that's a loaded question. I've been praying for our world to wake up, as it were. I think that kindness is an underutilized skill. We're not taught to be kind to ourselves. We judge others like that. We don't know their story. I've learned to the best of my ability to not judge. I observe. And I think it was Krishnamurti said, you see, but you do not yet observe. Or it was Sherlock Holmes, one or the other. And the highest form of intelligence is observation. And when we look with blinders on, based on our traumas, like I'll never do X again because so-and-so hurt me, or I'll never drive because I was in an accident and my sister died. So we take the perceived negative things and we actually use them against us. It's the myelin sheath in our brain. If you focus, when I focused on my trauma, and that's all I focused on, if you go to therapy and you talk about your trauma every week, what do you make stronger? The trauma. If you look at your trauma and say, yep, this happened to me, so what am I going to do about it? And that's something we're not taught as children. We are taught not to be angry. Well, I remember when I was 5 years old, my aunt raised me till I was 5. And they took me and I was getting a needle. And the doctor says, this isn't going to hurt a bit. And this is this long needle, right? And I've never had one that I recall. I said, no, that's going to hurt. And I jumped off the table and I ran down the hall. And they caught me and brought me back and gave me the needle. They charged my aunt extra because I was a difficult child. You know, when we feel like our faith has failed us, for example, you know, there can be a very, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but there can be a cultural, cultish way that we treat people that are different than us. When we go to other cultures, we assume our culture is the way to be. And you know, I've studied with Native Americans. I lived in Taiwan for a while. I was in Beijing for a while at the University of Beijing. I've done all sorts of things where I've been judged because through my sensitivity as a martial artist, I can read people. I mean, I was a fighter, but mixed martial arts is like, it's like bullies. When I fought, you didn't really hurt anybody. You had the ability to pull your punch. And I could knock somebody out, but why would I? You know, and so we have our anger. And, you know, like I think about when the Texas Tower, when the guy came down and shot all the people from the tower, it's like he had a bad day, you know, and he took out a whole bunch of people because he never had any skills how to handle the bad days. When we're traumatized up the yin yang and we decide we're going to turn this catastrophe into a blessing, that is a turning point. Not many people even have the wisdom or the awareness that they're not victims. We are trained and groomed to be victims. Our teachers tell us what to do, where to sit. Our God bless our elected officials. They have their storyline. There's no more congeniality in the House and the Senate between people. There used to be. I would say that with all the stuff going on in the world right now, it is a difficult time for everybody. If you just look at the star that imploded, for example, this is science. It created a black hole, a hole. What's been hitting our planet are gamma rays, which will make us a little squirrely. And in the Catholic Church, in the Irish Church, they say Christmas is a time of the thin places where the angels touch close to earth. When we're in trauma, if we choose to just literally say, okay, all hell just broke loose. I just had a car accident. I've broken this, that, and the other thing. How am I going to be better than I was before? People aren't taught how to do that. If you have some kind of a spiritual basis, and that could be something like curiosity, like what makes this tick? And what would happen if rather than take the doctor's word that I'm going to be in a wheelchair, I said, I don't choose that. I have a friend who was diagnosed with MS. The doctor said, oh, you've got lesions in your brain. Get your electric wheelchair. She said, thank you very much, and left. She did some stuff. She doesn't have lesions. She's fully functioning. Never got the electric wheelchair. My daughter was diagnosed with a congenital defect in the tendons, which my mom had. And she went all over the world looking for an answer. She was in so much pain you couldn't touch her Achilles heel tendon. And now she walked with us 2.3 miles or 6 miles with no pain. And she went from being in a wheelchair with this diagnosis of get used to it to walking with her mom 2.6 miles. It's amazing. I've seen
And that's
people that have
possible
been
when you choose.
paralyzed. Yes. And it's like she didn't give up. And if we have something, a friend, a colleague, someone who can be an advocate for you when you're down and out, and if you don't have it, say, wait a minute, I got me, breathe. And then you find 5 or 6 things, like Irv found one thing, a jacuzzi. Like this morning, I woke up in the foulest mood possible. I hurt all over, I was achy. And I thought, oh man, this isn't going to work for me. What are my 9 things? Well, I have flowers in front of me. I have flowers in the hallway. I went outside. We got the John Deere tractor unstuck. The battery was dead. I had a battery. I could jumpstart it all by my lonesome. I finished the grass. I finished mulching the leaves. I did it when the rain started. And I had so much joy being outside. So one of the things you can do to elevate yourself is get out of sitting in your chair all day eating bonbons. Is that going to help you? No. Is it going to make you worse? Yes. Negative power will give you all of the vices so that you shut yourself off. Choosing to expand in the face of this horrid contraction, you're going to cry, you're going to be pissy, you're going to have bad days. But if you said something like, you know what, if this is for me, there's got to be a reason I'm alive. I was rescued out of a burning building when I was 3 years old. And I didn't remember that till much later when people told me about it. And it's like the fireman, my mom was downstairs, her feet were in water, she burned her feet. She left me. That was when I was home visiting. And I crawled up the stairs into the attic and they went and got me. And so that was trauma I didn't even remember until it was brought to my attention. You know, so we all have traumas. We stuff them until we're ready to unstuff them. So for your listeners, I say, if you're going to be angry, be a good angry. Write it down and burn it. So you get it out. You light a candle. It's called freeform writing. You at the top, you write for the highest good because you're giving your unconscious permission to vent. Like, I hate my life. It's not fair. And you're scribbling because maybe your trauma was before you wrote. And you write for 20 minutes. When you get up, you take it to the kitchen sink and you burn it. And if you can't burn multiple pages, what I do it is I'll write from here down. I'll turn the page upside down. I'll cover it with, don't use a pencil, you'll break it. And you write what you think. And when you're done, it's like throwing up. When you burn it, it goes up in smoke. Your unconscious says, oh, we completed that. Oh, yippee. And I did that. My God, there were times when I did it every day for 6 weeks. I hate to love and love to hate freeform writing because you bore into your unconscious or your subconscious. I could write, oh God, I wish I'd remember to turn off the kettle. Well, I think I have enough water till my 20 minutes is up. Oh my God, it's only 15 minutes. Oh, I forgot that I have my hair appointment later today. Oh, the chiropractor, I completely slipped it. And you just write it. And then usually I'd get to minute 18, and then I'd burst into tears and I'd have boogers and I'd tissues and I'd still write. The timer went off. I got up, burned it. And you burn one page at a mind, you can get away with it over your kitchen sink. I did that for years, off and on. Now for 25 years, I've done that. It has cleaned me out. When I get gnarly and covered up with gook, oh, it's time for freeform writing. Do I really have to do? Yes, you need to do freeform writing. Then when you're done, it's like, oh my God, I had a V8. Not I should have had a V8. I had a V8 and I got my life force back. The negativity sucks us dry. Our myelin sheets get coated with gook and we can't think straight.
Yeah.
So that's one way that I use freeform writing. Also art, drawing. I was with a nonprofit for almost 19 years. And about the last 9 or 10 as the board chair, we used art to help battered women and children and veterans heal. And one art project can change your life. It's the most incredible thing in the world. So those are 2 things that our listeners can do. And if you can't write or you've got a broken arm, you got your other arm. I dislocated my shoulder. I couldn't write. I used my left hand. You know, when I broke my leg, I did something else. You know, when I had a concussion, I did something else. So we are resilient. And I would write somewhere on a piece of paper, I am magnificent. I am worthy. I deserve happiness. This will take me to places I never dreamed possible.
Yeah.
If you'd asked me this 30 years ago, 37 years ago, I would have said you're crazy. You know, and I was justified in my anger. It's not fair, God. You took my mother, you took my daughter, you took my health, you took my home. What did it get me? Nothing except misery. So I
Well,
had
actually, speak to that. I want to speak to that for a second because here's the deal, right? The truth is, we come into this world with nothing and we
Exactly.
leave the world with nothing. So what do we really own, actually? Right? Like we take possession of things, but we, and I guess technically, you've got a mortgage or, a title of a car or whatever, and it says that, Dr. Lin Morel is the owner of it. But at the end of the day, God is the owner of everything. And so
Exactly.
when we can recognize that we're just here as stewards, and we're here to, manage what we have before us, and ideally we come together to make the world a better place before we transition.
Yes. And we don't even own our breath. We
True.
receive the breath. So what breathes us,
Right.
And it's like, I look at every day at this point in my life as though it might be my last. So what am I going to leave behind? I'm going to leave behind kindness. I'm going to leave around with this podcast some things that help me get through, because every tragedy can be a triumph. Every step that you trip on can become a stepping stone. And I chose consciously wisdom, that came out of me. I've done wild stuff because I'm in attunement now with whatever breathes me. And if I hear, don't go do that, I said, really? What do you want me to do? Go home. And I come home and I get a call and somebody's having a big trauma and they needed to talk to me. So my life is very much one of flow now. I don't sweat the small stuff as much. Like I sweat it last night. I got lost picking Paul up because he missed his train. And I was having like one of those days where it was really, I was tired. I'd been up since 5. I got lost. My Waze every so often goes wonkers. And my Waze was taking me to Philadelphia. And I said, Melbourne's not in Philadelphia. So I called Paul. I said, Paul, I was allegedly a mile away from the train station and it took me in the opposite direction. Can you talk me in? Because my Waze went wonkers. And it's like, I could have, oh my God, I'm a bad person. But it's like, okay, honey, talk me in because I am completely lost. He goes, okay, go another 2 miles. You're going to come to a Wawa station, turn left. Okay, it's going to be called King Road. Go about 3 miles. And he just talked me in the whole time. God, he deserves sainthood. And we all deserve sainthood because we're alive. And it's not easy. It's
No.
so not easy. And yet, when we allow ourselves to go with the flow of life, stuff happens, and there's a 4-letter word I use sometimes, and it stands for finally understanding, caring, kindness. So when I get upset and I say that word, I know I'm out of balance. And then I'll go, oh, Lynn, finally understanding, caring, kindness. Let's take a breath, girlfriend. If you can't have fun with it, when we start to make fun of our trauma, and I started to hyperventilate because I'm super high stress sometimes. And I've been working with people that were in high stress. I just tongue on the roof of my mouth. Okay, let's breathe in, receive the breath. I use my own medicine all the time. And I invite your readers to take one thing, like one baby thing, and do it. Because the doing is what does it. And then you break your bondage with the negativity. It's here. There's no getting around it.
And here's the thing, it doesn't take long to shift it. When we slow down enough, allow ourselves to experience it and not resist it, because as the saying goes, what we resist persists, and it's true. But if we just allow ourselves to experience it, literally it can shift in minutes. Like, you give yourself a 20-minute timeout, so to speak, to free write, just to let it cleanse you and move you, right? I remember, at certain stages, I wasn't in a space to write. So I'm like, well, what can I do? And I would go to my car and I would literally scream at the top of my lungs. And you would think, given all the rage that I was present to at the time, I'd be there for like, God knows how long. And what I found was in about a minute, minute and a half, it would shift. I would I would allow myself to scream until one of two things happened. I either cried or I laughed, because then I knew I shifted. I knew I shifted. And, there were times I did this, I don't even know how many times a day, until I was able to just, let that out of my system. And I think that, and it doesn't cost anything, folks. I will say, Dr. Lin, you spoke to something earlier. I've done a lot of talk therapy in my life, and the talk therapy I've come to realize only kept the trauma present. In
Mhm,
fact, it magnified it for me.
mhm.
And then I was kind of living under a black cloud of my trauma. But when we can actually take the time to learn the wisdom and what is the trauma here to teach me,
Mhm.
and take that away, then we can literally put that experience behind us and no longer be lived by it or it living us.
Right, exactly. And to speak to your screaming, I can't tell you how often I screamed in my car, cried in my car. It probably wasn't safe, but I did a lot of traveling back then. I had my van and my dog. I'd be singing at the top of my lungs, not making any sense. I had a voice teacher named Eagle Godine, God bless her. Every time I sit down for a voice lesson, I'd end up sobbing like a baby. And she said to me one time, when you leave, I want you to sing, but I don't want you to sing with words. I'm going to go, and I see the tree on the side of the road, and, and I'm just, in the next thing you know, I'm crying. Or there were times, God bless me, when the only way I could work with clients was I was on my way to Washington, and this lady had a major trauma, and she was a friend, and her experience was coming up. I said, look, the only time I have is I'm driving to Washington. She goes, oh, my sister's in Washington. And I hadn't had sugar in 2 years, right? Or coffee. So we drive to Washington. She needs to stop because she's in rage. I don't do this anymore, but I used to carry a wiffle ball bat if
Mhm.
I needed to let some rage out. I would never hurt anybody, but a telephone pole, or she wanted to get out of that car and like hit the telephone pole. So he pulled into a cornfield and there was a pole. And she came back and she goes, I feel really good right now.
Mhm.
But it has to be followed with the release. You can't
Yeah.
just hold the rage. You have to let the rage go into the pole. And I would sing. I would stop the car sometimes and just ah, and then like you, I would have the release. But the thing that can shift me in seconds is like, okay, what's around me right now? My flowers. Oh my God, I have some hot tea. Isn't that wonderful? My phone works. And I just literally go, oh, and I have my checkbook with me. Oh my God, and I have the right glasses to wear. I can go on and on and on. And about 8 or 9 times, I feel better. And
Mm.
the screaming does it. The singing does it. Singing
Singing is powerful.
and singing sort of in tongues. It doesn't mean anything. Like I play the piano and I play a lot of like Taizé music and more holy music, or in the Moonlight Sonata or Exodus or whatever I'm playing. And instead of say Domine Dies Filius Patris, I'll go Yo no malakiliki siala malakilina, and I have no idea what it means. But when I'm done, it's like, wow, whatever that was cathartic because it's vibration.
Yes.
And it's not perfect. Each person has their own path. And yet all the paths have stepping stones that you can find. It's like a treasure hunt, and I blew out my knee. I would have been on the national karate team. It was my whole life. I blew my knee out and I had surgery. And they said I'd never kick again. Well, I ended up going to mainland China where I met some dude from Louisiana who said, you're going to be able to kick again. And by God, I was, and I went and competed again. But it had changed my life so that I didn't need that avenue. I ended up doing Tai Chi, something that I could do standing or seated. And each person, if you loved coloring when you were a kid, color. If you like drawing, draw. I threw paint. I literally got a 4
That's
by 8. I
fun.
put it outside. I threw paint at it. And then I took grasses and weeds and I brushed it with the weeds. And when I was done, I called it calm in chaos, because all of this throwing of different color painted, it looked like a woman that you were looking at from behind with a silhouette. and I took a picture of it. It was incredible. And then I did another one with grasses, and someone said it looked like one of those Egyptian bird things. And in the middle was like a third eye. None of this was conscious. It's just throwing paint. And yet in the middle of that, I got to release it. Yeah, I
Yes.
was outside and it was up against a tree, and there were a bunch of my friends, and oh my God, it was so cathartic.
Yeah.
So anything, knitting, sewing,
Walking nature.
volunteering, walking, I would walk and go, be still with the step. And I'd say to myself, trust in the pause, I am. Be still, pause, I am. And I would do that for miles. I would say be still, meaning still the trauma, trust something bigger than me, and I am.
Yeah.
We are here for a purpose and a reason and a season. And as long as we got our breath, we're here and we're doing something right.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's
So we're getting up on the top of the hour now. So I want to end with, what does thriving mean to you?
Mhm.
And how can we individually and collectively step into it?
My sense, and I don't think about thrive as much as flourish.
Okay.
I have to say, since I made that declaration, I wanted the wisdom of Solomon. Imagine a girl that never spoke up. Do you want to go to see, do you want Chinese food? Or do you want to tell? I don't care. Well, would you like to see this movie or that? I don't care. I was the I don't care kid, and I was zipped. As I began to thrive, because I had the martial arts, I had a certain level of confidence. So I started my business on a face of the back of a Chinese placemat. Somebody said, if you would do anything, what would it be? An hour and a half later, I had my first client. I was still working at Giant Stadium, a paid client. And all she had to do is, if you could do anything, what would it be? I froze. I didn't have a clue who I was, what was thriving. I was doing what I was supposed to do, to be a good girl, to be not make waves, to be a spec writer buyer at Giant Stadium. I bought pipes, valves, and fittings. I was the one that never got the raise, never got promoted. Thriving for me was when I said, you know what? If I don't take care of myself, no one else is. So I'm going to look at my life as everything is for me. And if everything is for me, then I'm going to be successful. And I began to thrive because I stopped waiting for someone to rescue me. And thank God for my martial arts. And thank God for the people that dropped into my life. Like having you in my life is this exquisiteness, because we have a shared trauma in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And traumatized people tend to attract traumatized people. But you're not necessarily going to thrive unless you're on a common trajectory of, well, what does thrive mean to me? Thriving for me means I have a great day where I've touched lives.
Mm.
Flourishing for me is I have a great day, I touch lives, and I get paid. Because I'm also a minister and I work regardless race, creed, color, situation, circumstance, or environment. Yes, I need to receive remuneration, but I'm not going to turn somebody away. To me, unless Spirit says to, that to me is thriving, because I can take what I've learned and I can reach to the person who's maybe on the rung behind me, climbing up the ladder to the mountain, and I can give them a hand.
Yeah.
Flourishing and thriving is when the person ahead of me is reaching down to me. So together we link arms and hands, and together we can come into one accord. What is that? It's love. It's kindness. If we knew, for example, your bomber's secret pain, which we'll never know, what prompted a human being to do that? There's incredible pain, hatred, vengeance. But if we could see them with our soulic eyes, we take them in our arms. And I know that sounds radical, but
No, it's the
murderers.
actual truth, because I want to speak to that for a second and then I'll let you finish. But I didn't care where they came from. In the beginning stages of my journey, I literally would silently contemplate how I would kill them with my bare hands. Truth.
Yeah.
When I finally chose to forgive, which was about 2 years into my journey, I had no idea what was going to happen when I did that. But when I did that, I instantly felt peace all over me. And for the first time, the absolute hatred I had towards those two young men turned into compassion. That compassion over time led to curiosity. And that curiosity got me like questioning, who does this? Who does this? And what I learned was those two young men growing up lived in a war-torn country that they were hit with bombs almost on a daily basis. They had trauma that was never dealt with. They had rage that was never dealt with. They just happened to act it out on one of their bad days. And as a result, people died, hundreds were injured, and the world will never forget that particular day. However, after all of the years have passed, I recognize that he's no different than you and I. They are no different than you and I. He just did something unthinkable. And in many cases, many people would say unforgivable. I used to believe that. But he acted out of his rage. And if we can actually, those people need love the most. And when we can start to lean into that and start to love the aggressors, and I know that's so hard to say and to hear, but it's the truth. That's when we will transcend out of war. That's when we will stop the violence.
Absolutely. And, you know, my Native American elder that adopted me, so to speak, she would say, honey, you point that finger at someone else, you best mind 3 are pointing back at you. So what we love in another exists in us. What we hate in another and condemn in another exists in us, because we are all facets in the diamond called God. And God allows, because we're here to have free will, well, free choice, actually, once we're down here. And when we come to compassion, then we're free. We're truly free. And I still have days when I just, and yet I have the utmost compassion for my first husband. I wanted to kill the man. I truly did. He strangled me. He knocked me out, all that. And I could hit him. I scored a punch. I didn't hit him. But he got pissed off and he knocked me out. He cold cocked me and he strangled me. And when he strangled me in front of our daughter, that was when I knew I needed to leave, because I was married for life. So what I say is, what God puts together, let no man put asunder. But what God puts asunder, like you being in the bomb, or me having all these things happen. You know, I attempted to tell a therapist one time. She said, well, please tell me your life story. I said, I can't do that. You'll get sick. Don't be ridiculous. She had to go for therapy. And I didn't even tell her all of it. So it's like, that's my story, but that helps me to have the wisdom of Solomon. I chose that. And I chose compassion. I have compassion for Putin. Do I like the man? Heck no. But he is one of God's creation. He's creating horrid. I mean, I can't even begin to imagine what the people in the Ukraine are going through. And my husband was born in Vienna. His parents were Ukrainian. He grew up, you know, on sugar and potato water because there was no food. And yet he's the kindest man I know. And yet he could be the most bitter, you know, vigilante. And his mom ran guns in World War II, you know, and his aunt, I guess it would be her sister, was going to be shot with her daughter because they looked Jewish, except her father was a Catholic priest. It's the only reason they let him live, you know. So people do stupid stuff. I truly believe that, this is from my personal experience, when we die, we close our eyes here, we wake up there. There's a continuum. And when we wake up, we have the bigger vision of what's going on. My brother died. He had open heart surgery. He called me the night before and said, yeah, I'm going to get my valve, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, uh-oh, he's not going to make it. I called all my people for prayer. I get the call the next day from his wife. He's unconscious. He had a bleed and he's in a coma. And I said, I don't know what to do. I said, pray for him. Tell him to wiggle his toe. So she went to the hospital, and for the week or 10 days that he was in an induced coma, she go, Earl, if you can hear me, wiggle your toe. And he said that's the only thing that kept him from leaving. And he was not a particularly religious person. He spent a week with Jesus. This is my brother who's like, he's into space things. And I said, so what's going, you won't believe me. He said, try me, bro. I was with you. I was praying for you. He goes, well, he showed me the world, and he showed me mass graves. And I was really, really, really upset. And he goes, how can this be? And then he said, and Jesus opened his arms, and he was so big, he had his arms over the whole planet Earth. Mm. And my brother came back in his body. This is about 7 years ago. He's a changed man. And he said to me, Lynn, why did God save me? I didn't want to come back. Well, Pat kept asking me to come back. And he said, well, what am I going to do? I'm here for a reason. I said, Earl, you've been making music for 65 years. He goes, go do something. He did this little jazz thing. He put it up on Amazon. He's #1 in Japan for jazz. You know, that's when we get a second chance. So when we're in the deep doo-doo, know you're not alone. Someone has climbed out of that pit, and someone will hand you a hand if you let them. So flourishing is when we've done our thriving and we become, how can I put it, agents of love and light, compassion and kindness. And that's really what I would wish for everybody that walks this journey of trauma. It's individual to each of us. I withdrew. Other people need to reach out. I got angry. Thank God I had martial arts. I didn't hurt anybody, except maybe myself. And I've learned to be gentle. I've learned when I'm in a bad mood, like this morning, I needed to get physical. I didn't care that it was raining out. I didn't care if it was wet reeds. It's easier to pick them up. And I got everything I wanted to do. And my prayer is that everybody here take the one thing or the 10 things, and that they know that if we can do it, they can do it, and they'll do it their way.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you, Dr. Lin. I could sit here and talk to you for hours, but we do need to wrap up here today. So thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for not giving up on yourself, because if you had, we wouldn't have had the experience of your brilliance and of your wisdom, and to inspire people like me and to the listeners. As I indicated at the top of the show, I have never met anyone in this lifetime that has gone through more trauma than I have, and yet you would never know it. You're at peace, and it shows that you've done the work and that you walk the talk. And for listeners, if you want to learn more about Dr. Lin Morel, you'll be able to access her website, learn more about her programs. She's an amazing soul doing extraordinary work in the planet. And thank you for your words of wisdom. Thank you for bringing us to a place of flourishing, and wishing you a blessed day.
Thank you, and bless all our listeners and those that are have access to this.
Yes. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, folks, well, stay tuned for the next Thrive Now episode, which will come out next week. And again, this show is all about having conversations that matter and make a difference for humanity, and how we can rise up and live our best lives where we're thriving, and to use Dr. Lin's, word of flourishing. Like, we all deserve that. And that's what our wish is for you. Have a blessed day.